The smell of lilies makes me want to vomit now. They were everywhere, clinging to the pillars of the ballroom, woven into the hair of the woman who used to be my best friend. My sister, Elena. She stood there, glowing in a dress that cost more than our father's car, her hand tucked firmly into the arm of Marcus Thorne. My fiancé. Well, he was my fiancé until 20 minutes ago when the priest asked if anyone had any objections, and Elena didn't just object. She produced a positive pregnancy test, and a diamond ring Marcus had bought her behind my back. I'm sorry, Lyra, Marcus had whispered, not looking sorry at all. He looked relieved. Relieved to be trading the boring sister for the one who lived for the spotlight. Now, I'm standing in the shadows of the coat room, the silk of my own wedding gown feeling like sandpaper against my skin. I can't hear the laughter from the reception. They didn't even cancel it. They just swapped the brides. My parents? They were already toasted, hugging Marcus, thrilled that the Thorne dowry was still staying in the family. You look like you're planning a murder. Or a very expensive funeral. The voice came from the darkest corner of the room. I froze. A man was sitting on a wooden crate, a glass of cheap whiskey in his hand. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a faded denim jacket and boots that had seen better days. This was Cassian, the charity case cousin Marcus had mentioned once. The black sheep who worked at a scrapyard and lived in a studio apartment that probably smelled like motor oil. Maybe both, I snapped, wiping a tear before it could ruin my makeup. What are you doing here, Cassian? Come to watch the circus. I don't like clowns, he said, his voice deep, like gravel grinding together. He stood up, and I realized how big he was. He towered over Marcus, but he carried himself with a strange, heavy stillness. But I do like justice. And you, Lyra, you're getting the raw end of a very bad deal. I have nothing, I whispered, the weight of it finally hitting me. My family disowned me the second I walked off that altar. Marcus blocked my cards. I have a wedding dress and a suitcase. That's it. Cassian stepped into the light. He had a scar running through his eyebrow and eyes that looked like they had seen the end of the world. I have a spare room. It's small, it's loud, and it's a long way from this gold-plated hellhole. But nobody will look for you there. I looked at the door leading back to the ballroom, to the sister who stole my life. Then I looked at the man the world called nobody. Take me with you, I said. I didn't know then that I wasn't running away with a mechanic. I was walking straight into the arms of the man who owned the very ground Marcus Thorne walked on. But as we stepped out into the rain, leaving the music behind, Cassian gripped my hand. And for the first time in my life, I felt a spark of something that wasn't fear. It was fire. As we drove away in his battered truck, I saw Cassian check a burner phone. A message flashed on the screen. The assets are frozen. Should we move on the Thorne estate tonight, boss? The apartment was actually a loft built into the back of a massive, rusted warehouse on the edge of the city. It smelled of ozone, old iron, and something metallic. It was the polar opposite of the velvet-lined cage I grew up in. It's not much, Cassian said, tossing his keys onto a metal table. But the locks work, and the neighbors don't ask questions. I sat on the edge of a bed that felt like it was made of bricks. Why are you helping me? You're Marcus's cousin. You should be at the after-party, celebrating the merger. Cassian let out a short, dark laugh. He started unbuttoning his shirt, revealing ink-black tattoos that crawled up his neck, symbols I didn't recognize, but they looked ancient, predatory. Marcus and I share blood, Lyra. We don't share values. He likes to own things. I like to control things. There's a difference. I don't understand, I said, my voice trembling. You will, he replied, handing me a glass of water. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we start the process of making them regret they ever learned your name. I woke up at 4 a.m. to the sound of heavy machinery. Looking out the window, I expected to see junk cars being crushed. Instead, I saw 3 black SUVs idling in the yard. Men in charcoal suits, real suits, not the flashy ones Marcus wore, were standing in a semicircle around Cassian. He didn't look like a mechanic anymore. He stood with his shoulders back, his presence commanding the very air around him. One of the men handed him a briefcase. "The Thorne shipping lanes are compromised," the man said, his voice carrying in the crisp morning air. "We can squeeze them by Monday." "No," Cassian said. I watched him light a cigarette, the ember glowing in the dark. "Don't squeeze. Break. I want Marcus Thorne begging for a loan by the end of the month. And tell the girl's father that his textile contracts are being reviewed by the board." My heart hammered against my ribs. My poor savior was dismantling my family's empire before breakfast. I stepped back from the window, but I tripped over a loose floorboard. Downstairs, the conversation stopped instantly. The silence was deafening. Then, I heard the heavy thud of boots on the metal stairs. Thud, thud, thud. The door creaked open. Cassian stood there, the smoke from his cigarette curling around his head like a halo of shadow. He looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see the cousin. I saw the dawn. "You're awake," he said softly. "I hoped you'd sleep longer. There are things you aren't ready to see yet, Lyra." "Who are you?" I whispered. "And don't lie to me. I've had enough lies to last a lifetime." Cassian walked toward me, stopping just inches away. I could feel the heat radiating off him. He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw where a bruise from my father's disciplinary grip was still fading. "I'm the man who's going to give you everything they took," he said. "But in exchange, you have to promise me one thing." "Anything," I said, and I meant it. "Don't fall in love with me," he whispered. "Because I'm not a good man, Lyra. I'm just the only monster who's on your side." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "By the way, your sister called your phone." I took the liberty of answering. "I told her you were dead to them. I didn't tell her you were becoming the woman who would eventually buy their house and turn it into a parking lot." The next morning didn't start with a silver tray and lukewarm tea. It started with the smell of strong black coffee and the sight of Cassian cleaning a handgun at the kitchen table. He didn't look up when I walked in, still wearing the oversized hoodie he'd lent me. The silk wedding dress was in a trash bag by the door. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his voice flat. "I think I'm living with one," I replied, sitting across from him. "Those men last night, they didn't call you Cassian. They called you sir." He clicked the magazine into place with a sound that felt like a period at the end of a sentence. "Names are for family. Titles are for business. And right now, Lyra, you and I are in the business of survival." He pushed a laptop across the table. On the screen was a live feed of a high-end jewelry store, the one where Marcus had bought Elena's apology diamond. "They're there right now," Cassian said, "picking out wedding bands for the real wedding next month. Your father is footing the bill with money he doesn't actually have. He's leveraged his textile mills against a high-interest loan from a private equity firm." "Which firm?" I asked, my heart hammering. Cassian leaned back, a predator's smile touching his lips. "Mine. Or rather, a shell company I control. Your father thinks he's borrowing from a savior. He's actually putting his neck in a noose I've been braiding for 3 years." "Why did you wait until now?" "I was waiting for a reason to tighten it," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "Marcus was always a parasite. But when he insulted the one person in that family who actually had a soul, well, let's just say the charity case decided to stop being charitable." He stood up and walked to a closet, pulling out a sleek, black box. "Open it." Inside was a dress. Not lace, not white. It was deep charcoal silk, cut like a weapon. Along with it was a pair of heels that looked like they could draw blood. "We're going to a gala tonight," Cassian said. "The Thorne Group's annual fundraiser. They think you're hiding in a hole, crying over your broken heart. I want them to see you're not just alive, you're the one holding the match." "But they'll recognize you," I argued. "They think you're a mechanic. They see what they want to see, Lyra. To them, a man in a denim jacket is invisible. Tonight, I'll be wearing a suit that costs more than Marcus's entire wardrobe. And I won't be Cassian the cousin. I'll be Silas Vane, the majority shareholder they've been trying to meet for months." As I touched the silk of the dress, a cold shiver of realization washed over me. I wasn't just a guest. I was the bait. And for the first time, I didn't mind. I wanted to see the look on Elena's face when she realized the sister she discarded was standing next to the man who owned her future. We pulled up to the gala in a car that didn't roar, it purred. As the valet opened the door, Cassian leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear. Remember, Lyra, don't look at them with anger. Look at them with pity. Because by midnight, they won't even own the air they're breathing. The ballroom was a sea of champagne and hypocrisy. I felt Cassian's hand on the small of my back, steady and grounding. He looked different, lethal. In a tailored black tuxedo, the scars and tattoos were hidden, but the aura of danger was magnified. There they are, I whispered, spotting my parents near the stage. My mother was dripping in pearls, laughing at something Marcus was saying. Elena was draped over his arm, her hand perpetually rubbing her stomach, as if to remind the world of her conquest. Wait for my signal, Cassian murmured. We moved through the crowd like smoke. People turned their heads, whispering. They didn't recognize me at first. The meek Lyra was gone. I walked with my head up, my eyes cold. We were standing near the bar when Marcus saw us. He choked on his drink, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He nudged Elena, and her smug smile vanished instantly. They marched toward us, my father trailing behind like a loyal dog. Lyra, my father barked, his face reddening. What the hell is the meaning of this? And why are you with this trash? He glared at Cassian. Cassian, get out of here before I have security throw you into the gutter where you belong. Cassian didn't flinch. He didn't even look at my father. He just signaled the bartender for 2 glasses of sparkling water. You're embarrassing yourself, Arthur, Cassian said calmly. You dare speak to me like that? My father hissed. I helped Marcus's father keep you off the streets. You're a grease monkey. Actually, a voice boomed from the stage. It was the master of ceremonies. If I could have everyone's attention. We have a very special guest tonight. The man who just saved this foundation with a $10 million endowment. Please welcome the CEO of Vane Holdings, Mr. Silas Vane. The spotlight swung. It didn't go to the stage. It hit us. It hit Cassian. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Marcus dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Silas Vane, Elena stammered, her eyes darting between Cassian and the black silk dress I was wearing. No, he's just the cousin. He's poor. He works at a scrapyard. Cassian took a slow sip of his water. I own the scrapyard, Elena. I also own the bank that just called in your father's loans 5 minutes ago. And Marcus? Cassian stepped closer to the man who had betrayed me. Marcus stepped back, nearly tripping over the shards of his own glass. The Thorne Group is under investigation for tax evasion, Cassian whispered, loud enough for the inner circle to hear. I leaked the files this morning. You're not just broke, Marcus. You're a liability. My father lunged forward, grabbing Cassian's lapel. You can't do this. We're family. Cassian didn't even move. 2 massive men in suits appeared out of nowhere, pinning my father's arms. But it wasn't the guards that stopped him. It was the look in Cassian's eyes. Family? Cassian asked. You threw Lyra out in the rain for a check that just bounced. Now, get out of my building. The drive back was silent, but it wasn't the heavy silence of before. It was the hum of a hunt successfully concluded. I looked at my reflection in the car window. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. She looked powerful. She looked terrifying. You're thinking about them, Cassian said, not taking his eyes off the road. I'm thinking about how easy it was, I said. How quickly they turned into monsters when the money disappeared. Money doesn't change people, Lyra. It just unmasks them, he said. He pulled the car over on a cliffside overlooking the city lights. But don't mistake a battle for the war. Marcus is desperate now. And a desperate man is more dangerous than a greedy one. What can he do? You took everything. Not everything. He still has his pride. And he still thinks he can manipulate you. Cassian's phone buzzed. He looked at it and sighed. Speak of the devil. Your sister is at the loft. She managed to follow a delivery truck in. She's waiting at the gates. When we arrived, Elena was huddled in the rain, looking nothing like the glowing bride from the gala. Her makeup was streaked, her expensive hair ruined. When she saw me, she ran to the car, pounding on my window. "Lyra, please," she screamed. "You have to talk to him. Tell Cassian or Silas, whoever he is, to stop. Dad is having a heart attack. The police are at Marcus's house. I'm pregnant, Lyra. Think of the baby." I opened the door and stepped out. The rain felt cold, but I didn't feel it. I looked at my sister, the woman I had shared a bedroom with for 18 years. The woman who had slept with my fiancé and mocked my poverty. "Is it Marcus's?" I asked quietly. Elena hesitated. Just a split second. But I saw it. The flicker of doubt. "It doesn't matter," she sobbed. "We're sisters. You can't let us starve." "You didn't care if I starved when you took my keys and told me to never come home," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the anger I thought I'd feel. I just felt empty. "You chose a throne made of lies, Elena. Don't be surprised when it burns down." I turned to walk away, but she grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "You think he loves you? He's using you to get back at the Thorne family. You're just a trophy to him. A way to prove he's better than Marcus." I felt a hand on my shoulder. Cassian was standing behind me. He didn't say a word. He just looked at Elena, and she let go as if she'd been burned. "She's right about one thing," Cassian said to me once we were inside, and the gates were locked. I did start this to prove a point. I looked at him, my heart sinking. "And now?" He reached out, his hand hovering near my face before he pulled it back, clenching it into a fist. "Now I realize that the point doesn't matter. Only you do. And that makes me weak. Which means I have to finish this tonight." He walked toward his wall of monitors, his face hardening. "Marcus didn't go to the police. He went to a contact in the underworld. He's not trying to save his company anymore, Lyra. He's put a price on both our heads. We aren't just playing with money anymore. We're playing with blood." The hum of the computer fans was the only sound in the loft. Outside, the rain had turned into a torrential downpour, masking the sounds of the city. I watched Cassian's face as it was illuminated by the blue light of the screens. He wasn't the man who had cleaned a handgun this morning. He was a general preparing for a siege. "He wouldn't," I whispered, the word feeling small and fragile. "Marcus is a coward. He plays with contracts and bank accounts, not this. A cornered rat doesn't care about the rules of the house, Lyra," Cassian said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "He's lost his status. He's lost his inheritance. In his mind, I'm the one who stole it, and you're the prize I took to spite him." He turned the screen toward me. It showed a grainy thermal feed of the perimeter fence. Two figures were moving near the south gate, staying low, avoiding the sweep of the security lights. They weren't dressed like guards. They moved with a practiced, lethal efficiency. "They're early," Cassian muttered. He stood up, reaching for a heavy tactical vest draped over a chair. "Stay in the inner office. The glass is reinforced. Don't come out until I tell you the air is clear." "Cassian, wait." I grabbed his arm. The fabric of his shirt was cold. "Is this because of me? If I hadn't walked out with you that night..." He stopped and looked at me. For a second, the mask of the dawn slipped. "If you hadn't walked out, I would have burned that ballroom down with everyone inside it eventually. You didn't cause this, Lyra. You just gave me a reason to survive it." He pushed me toward the small, windowless office and locked the door from the outside. I sat on the floor, my knees pulled to my chest, listening to the silence. Then the first gunshot rang out. It wasn't like the movies. It was a sharp, dry crack that echoed through the warehouse rafters. Then another, and a muffled shout that was cut short. My heart was a drum inside my ribs, threatening to burst. I realized then that Elena was right about one thing. The world I knew was gone. But she was wrong about everything else. I wasn't a trophy. I was the only thing keeping Cassian anchored to his humanity. The silence returned, heavier than before. Minutes felt like hours. I pressed my ear against the reinforced door, straining to hear a footstep, a breath, anything. Then the lock clicked. The door swung open, and I scrambled back. Cassian stood there. There was a streak of blood across his cheek, and his breathing was ragged. He wasn't holding a gun anymore. He He was holding a folder. "It's over," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "The men Marcus sent, they weren't professionals. They were desperate creditors he promised a payday. I gave them a better offer." "You bought them off?" "I gave them Marcus," Cassian said, a dark glint in his eyes. "By tomorrow morning, he'll wish he was in a prison cell. Because the people he owes money to are much less patient than the law." He walked over to me and held out his hand. As I took it, his phone chimed. It was a video message. I looked at the screen and gasped. It was Marcus, tied to a chair in a dimly lit basement, his face bruised beyond recognition. But it wasn't a stranger standing over him. It was my father. The video was silent, but the betrayal was loud. My father, the man who preached about family honor and the Thorne legacy, was holding a jagged piece of metal to Marcus's throat. His eyes were wide, manic, the look of a man who had lost his mind along with his bank account. "He's trying to trade Marcus for his debt," Cassian said, closing the video. "He thinks if he delivers the man who ruined the family, I'll wipe the slate clean for him." "He's my father," I whispered, though the word felt like ash in my mouth. "How can he be so monstrous?" "Greed is a hungry ghost, Lyra. It eats everything eventually." Cassian grabbed his coat. "We have to go. Not for Marcus. For the closure you deserve." We drove to an old textile mill, one of the properties my father had lost. It was a skeletal building, all broken glass and rusted looms. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of damp wool. We found them in the basement. My father looked up as we entered, his face lighting up with a terrifying, hopeful grin. "Silas. You came," he shouted, ignoring Marcus's muffled groans. "Look, I have him. I have the one who cheated your cousin. I have the one who embarrassed Lyra. We're on the same side now, aren't we?" I stepped forward, out of the shadows. My father's smile faltered when he saw my face. "Dad, stop," I said. "Put it down. Lyra, darling, you don't understand. This is for us. For our name. We can go back to how it was. We can buy back the estate. You can have the wedding you wanted, with someone better. Someone like Silas." "I don't want the estate," I said, my voice rising. "I don't want the name. You sold me, Dad. You stood by while Elena took my life, and then you threw me out because I was no longer an asset. You aren't doing this for me. You're doing this because you're afraid of being a nobody like Cassian used to be." Cassian stepped up beside me, his presence filling the room. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked at my father with pure, unadulterated pity. "The debt isn't wiped, Arthur," Cassian said. "In fact, I just bought the last of your personal holdings 10 minutes ago. You own nothing, not even the shirt on your back. And Marcus? He's going to spend the next 10 years in a federal pen for the documents I handed over to the DA tonight." My father's hand shook. The metal piece clattered to the floor. He slumped against a pillar, looking old and hollow. The king of textiles was a beggar in his own ruined kingdom. I turned to leave, but Marcus started laughing, a high, wheezing sound. "You think you won, Lyra?" he spat, blood leaking from his lip. "Ask him. Ask your Don why he really moved into that scrapyard 3 years ago. Ask him about your grandfather's will." The drive back was different. The air in the car felt electric, charged with a secret that hadn't been fully whispered yet. I looked at Cassian. He was gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. "What was he talking about?" I asked. "My grandfather?" Cassian didn't answer for a long time. He pulled into the scrapyard and shut off the engine. The silence of the warehouse felt like a physical weight. The silence of the warehouse felt like a physical weight. "Your grandfather, Elias, was the only one in your family who had a drop of integrity," Cassian finally said. "He knew what your father and Marcus's father were becoming. He knew they were gutting the companies for personal gain." "Go on," I urged. "He left a secret codicil in his will. A massive block of shares and a trust fund that could only be activated if certain conditions were met. Conditions involving a betrayal of the bloodline. He hid the documents with a lawyer he trusted, my father." I felt the room tilt. "Your father?" "My father wasn't just a mechanic, Lyra. He was Elias's right-hand man. When your father found out, He framed mine for embezzlement. My father died in prison, disgraced and broken. I moved into this scrapyard because the documents were hidden under the floorboards of the shop. I spent 3 years waiting for the moment your father would prove himself unworthy enough to trigger the clause. So, you needed me to be betrayed, I whispered. You needed the wedding to fail, so you could take control. Cassian turned to me, his eyes dark with pain. I needed the truth to come out. But I never intended to use you, Lyra. I thought I'd just watch from the sidelines. But then I saw you standing there in that white dress, looking like the only light in a room full of darkness, and I couldn't let them have you. I wanted the shares, yes. But more than that, I wanted to save the only thing Elias actually cared about. Me, I said. Yes. You. He reached into the glove box and pulled out a leather-bound folder. These are yours. The shares, the trust, the properties. You are now the majority owner of everything your father ever touched. You don't need me anymore, Lyra. You're the Dawn now. I looked at the papers. Power. Money. Revenge. It was all there. I could walk away and never see any of them again. I could leave the poor, mafia Don in his warehouse and go back to a life of luxury. I looked from the papers to the man who had risked everything to clear his father's name. You're right, I said, my voice low. I don't need you, but I want to know one thing before I sign these. Did you love the mission, or did you love the girl who was too blind to see it? The weight of the leather-bound folder in my lap felt heavier than the wedding dress I'd discarded. Cassian didn't look at me. He stared out the windshield at the rusted iron gates of the scrapyard, his profile etched in the harsh yellow glow of a street lamp. The mission is over, Lyra, he said, his voice dropping to that gravelly whisper that always made my skin prickle. My father's name is clear. Your father is a memory. Marcus is a ghost. You have the keys to the kingdom. You can leave tonight, and you'll never have to smell motor oil or gunpowder again. Is that what you want? I asked. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. To be the man who just hands over the keys and fades back into the shadows? He finally turned to me. His eyes weren't cold anymore. They were exhausted. I spent 3 years living in this dirt, waiting for a chance to break the people who broke my father. I thought that when I won, I'd feel whole. But looking at you tonight in that office, terrified because of me, I realized I just became another monster in your life. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I touched his hand. It was scarred, calloused, and warmer than anything I'd ever known in my parents' marble halls. You didn't make me a victim, Cassian, I said, my voice gaining strength. You gave me the mirror I needed to see who I actually was. I wasn't the boring sister. I was the one they were afraid of, because I was the only one they couldn't buy. Suddenly, his radio crackled to life. A panicked voice broke through the static. Boss, we've got a problem at the hospital. Elena, she broke past the guards. She's not alone. She's got a lawyer and a camera crew. She's claiming you kidnapped Lyra and forced her to sign over the Thorne estate while she was under duress. Cassian cursed under his breath, reaching for the ignition. She's going for the court of public opinion. If she paints me as a kidnapper, those documents you're holding become worthless. No, I said, putting my hand over his. She's not going to paint you as anything, because she doesn't realize that the quiet sister isn't quiet anymore. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I wiped the stray smudge of mascara from under my eye and straightened my shoulders. Drive to the hospital, Cassian. It's time for the world to see the real poor Don and his wife. The hospital lobby was a circus. News cameras were clustered around Elena, who was draped in a hospital gown, weeping theatrically into a tissue. She looked frail, the perfect image of a grieving sister. My sister is being held against her will, she wailed to a reporter. That man, Cassian, he's a criminal. He's using her grief to steal our family's legacy. The crowd gasped as the sliding doors hissed open. I walked in first. I wasn't wearing the black silk dress anymore. I was wearing one of Cassian's white button-down shirts, tucked into dark jeans, with my hair pulled back in a sharp, low bun. I looked like a woman who had woken up from a nightmare and was ready to start a fire. The cameras swung toward me. Elena's eyes went wide. She tried to rush forward, her arms open for a hug. Lyra. Oh, thank God you're safe.
Tell them.
Tell them he kidnapped you. I didn't hug her. I didn't even flinch. I just stood there, letting the silence grow until the only sound was the clicking of shutters. The only person who kidnapped me, Elena, was you, I said, my voice carrying through the lobby like a bell. You kidnapped my future the day you stepped behind my back with Marcus. You kidnapped my home the day you watched our father throw me out. And now, you're trying to kidnap the truth. I pulled the folder from my bag and held it up. These are the legal documents of our grandfather's will. They prove that our family's wealth was built on the back of an innocent man, Cassian's father. They also prove that Marcus Thorne and our father have been laundering money through the textile mills for a decade. She's lying. Elena screamed, her voice cracking. She's brainwashed. I have the bank records, I said, stepping closer to her until we were inches apart. And I have the video of our father trying to kill Marcus to cover his tracks. Do you really want me to play it for these people, Elena? Or do you want to take the small allowance I've set aside for you and disappear? The reporters were frantic now, shouting questions. Elena looked around, realizing the tide had turned. The victim was gone. In her place was the majority shareholder of everything she ever coveted. Just as the security guards started pushing the press back, a man in a dark suit stepped out of the elevator. He didn't look like a reporter. He looked like the FBI. He walked straight toward me, but his eyes were on Cassian. Mr. Vane? We've processed the files you sent. We have the warrants. But there's one thing missing. The FBI agent led us to a private waiting room. Cassian stood by the window, his back to me. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. What's missing? I asked the agent. The location of the offshore accounts, he said. Marcus Thorne moved $50 million into a blind trust 24 hours ago. If we don't find it, the Thorne Group collapses and thousands of workers lose their pensions. We need the password. And only one person has it. My father, I whispered. No, Cassian said, finally turning around. Not Arthur. Marcus gave it to the person he trusted most. The person who was supposed to be his getaway plan. He looked at me. Then he looked at the door. 2 female officers walked in, leading Elena. She wasn't crying anymore. She looked defiant, her jaw set. I don't know what you're talking about, she snapped. Marcus didn't give me anything. He gave you a locket, Elena, I said, remembering a small gold piece she'd been flaunting weeks ago. The one with the M on the front. You told me it was an heirloom. But Marcus doesn't have heirlooms. He has encryption keys. Elena's hand flew to her neck, but the locket was gone. I held it up. I'd taken it from her jewelry box the night I left the estate, thinking it was just a piece of my stolen life. I hadn't realized I was holding the survival of 10,000 families in my palm. I handed the locket to the agent. Take it. Pay the workers. Close the mills. And make sure Marcus Thorne never sees a cent of it. As they led Elena away, this time in handcuffs, she looked back at me. There was no love in her eyes, only a deep, burning resentment. You think you've won, Lyra? You're just like us now. You're a cold, calculating bitch. No, Elena, I said softly. I'm just a woman who finally learned the value of what I'm worth. When the room was finally empty, Cassian walked over to me. He took the shares I was still holding and placed them on the table. You did it, he said. You saved the company. You saved the people. You're a hero, Lyra. I don't want to be a hero, I said, looking into his dark, complicated eyes. And I don't want to be a queen of an empire built on lies. 3 months later, the Thorne estate had been sold and turned into a community center. The textile mills were under new management, employee-owned and thriving. My father was in a private facility, and Elena, well, she was learning that life without a platinum card was a very different kind of reality. I stood on the deck of a small cabin in the mountains, far away from the city lights and the roar of the scrapyard. The air was cold and clean. I heard the door creak open behind me. Cassian walked out, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo or a tactical vest. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, looking like the man I'd first met in that dark coat room. "The lawyer's called," he said, handing me a mug. "The final transition is complete. You're officially a private citizen again, Lyra. Just a woman with a very large bank account and no family to spend it on." "I have family," I said, looking at him. He leaned against the railing, staring at the horizon. "I'm still not a good man, Lyra. I still have shadows. I still know how to break things better than I know how to fix them." "Then we'll fix them together," I said. I reached out and took his hand, lacing my fingers with his. "You spent 3 years waiting for revenge. I spent 24 years waiting for someone to see me. I think we've both waited long enough." He pulled me closer, resting his forehead against mine. For the first time, the stillness around him didn't feel like a threat. It felt like peace. "So, what now, Don Vane?" I teased. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Now we live. And we make sure that anyone who thinks they can step on the little guy learns a very, very hard lesson." I looked out at the sunrise, the orange and gold bleeding across the sky. I had lost a fiancé, a sister, and a father. I had lost the life I thought I wanted. But in the ruins of that betrayal, I had found a strength I didn't know I possessed. I had married the poor Dawn. And in doing so, I had become the richest woman in the world. Not because of the money, but because for the first time in my life, I was free. Justice isn't always a gavel in a courtroom. Sometimes, it's a quiet life, a warm hand, and the knowledge that you survived the fire without becoming the flame. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.